Welcome to Narayana IAS Academy. This is Sureka Bhaskar presenting to you the Daily News Analysis. So for today's discussion, we've picked up a number of articles from The Hindu and the Indian Express, which are both important and relevant for the UPSC CSE examination. Now let us have a look at the topics one by one. The first article for the day has been picked up from page number 1 of The Hindu. Putin accepts Modi's request to release the Indian military recruits. So in this particular article, we'll be discussing about the recent visit of the Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, to Moscow in the backdrop of the annual India-Russia summit that has actually been ongoing since the year 2000. And here, with respect to that of international relations perspective, we look into the ties between India as well as Russia. The second article has been picked up from page number 16 of the Indian Express, the High Seas Treaty. So in this particular article, we'll be discussing about the recent decision or the statement that has been given by the Indian government in order to sign and ratify the High Seas Treaty, one of the international legal architecture which is responsible for maintaining the ecological health of the oceans. So in this particular article, we'll be discussing about the concept of high seas, what are they, why is there a need for a high seas treaty, as well as the characteristic features of this particular treaty. The third article has been picked up from page number 13 of The Hindu. Financial Inclusion Index rose with growth across segments. So in this particular article, we'll be discussing about the recently released Financial Inclusion Index by the Reserve Bank of India for this particular year as of March 31st, 2024. And here we'll be discussing about the concept of what is financial inclusion as well as the key findings of the recent index, that is the Financial Inclusion Index, as well as the parameters it actually entails. The fourth article has been picked up from page number 16 of the Indian Express, Defamation Case Against Wikipedia and the Safe Harbour Protection Clause. So in this particular article, we'll be discussing about the recent filing of the defamation case by the ANI, that is the Asian News International, against Wikipedia in the Delhi High Court, seeking damages accounting or amounting to about rupees 2 crore. And in this particular article, we'll be looking into what is this concept of Safe Harbour Clause under the IT Act. The last article for the day has been picked up from page number 19 of the Indian Express, US economy no longer overheated, Fed's Powell. In this particular article, we'll be discussing about the statement that has been given by the Fed Reserve Chairman, Mr. Powell, stating that the US economy is no longer overheated and it has actually reached a significant cool phase when compared to that of its pre-pandemic era, and it has also reached a level of the pre-crisis era. In this particular article, we'll be looking into two important concepts. One is the concept of US Federal Reserve and how does its rate hikes and the cuts actually affects the Indian economy, as well as we look into the concept of what is overheating of the economy and what are the major factors associated with the same. And towards the end of the session, we'll be solving few prelims as well as the mains practice questions. And now let us get into the discussion. The first article for the day that we'll be discussing about is Putin accepts Modi's request in order to release the Indian military recruits. So in this particular article, we'll be discussing about the recent visiting of the Indian Prime Minister to Moscow in the backdrop of India-Russia annual summit that has actually been going on since 2000. And here for the prelims as well as the mains examination, what is more important is to discuss about India-Russia ties, okay? So this particular article will be discussing about India-Russia relationship as it is a part of international relations, and we can actually map this particular topic to GS paper 2 for the mains examination and the effect of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interest. Okay. So moving forward, so there has been actually a previous year question asked in the mains examination in 2020 on the Indo-US defense deal. So similarly, they have actually asked how it actually differs with respect to that of Indo-Russian defense deal and what is the significance. So here, the relationship that India actually shares with the immediate neighbors, the extended neighbors and other bilateral ties with countries like US, Russia, etc. are very, very important for your mains examination. Now let us understand what is this particular article discussing about. Okay, so the Indian Prime Minister had visited Moscow for the India-Russia annual summit, which has actually been ongoing since the year 2000. Now, let us understand the key outcomes of this particular visit. The first one, there has been economic targets where India and Russia had actually set a target of achieving around $100 billion in bilateral trade by 2030. That is, trade should actually hit around $100 billion by 2030. Next one, Modi had actually requested the Russian president in order to release the Indians in the Russian military. That is, Russia promised to discharge the Indians who were misled into joining the army, and this issue was actually raised by our Prime Minister during his talks. Next one, order of St. Andrew the Apostle Award. That is, the Prime Minister actually was officially conferred with Russia's highest civilian award, that is nothing but the Order of St. Andrew the Apostle, by the President Vladimir Putin for his exceptional services in promoting bilateral trade between the two countries. The next one, the Prime Minister had announced the opening of 2 new Indian consulates in the Russian cities of Kazan as well as Yekaterinburg. Okay. Moving forward, there will actually be energy sector cooperation where Russia is exploring a long-term oil deal with that of India. And next one, strategic partnership. That is, the Prime Minister had described Russia as India's all-weather friend and praised the Russian president's leadership in strengthening the bilateral ties. Now, let us quickly run through the kind of relationship and the key areas of cooperation that both India and Russia actually share that can be asked in your exam as well. So, there is bilateral importance, that is, Russia actually holds a crucial position in India's foreign policy as a key bilateral partner. Next one, there has been a long-standing friendship between India and Russia where India regards Russia as a long-standing and time-tested ally that has significantly contributed to its economic development as well as security. The next one, foundation of the partnership, it is actually, based on mutual interest in multilateralism, global peace and prosperity, and the entire relationship is actually built on 4 factors. One is mutual trust. The next one, there is mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity and core national interests. Next one is alignment on key international as well as regional issues concerning both war as well as peace. Now moving forward, let us see what are the major areas of cooperation between the two nations. The first one is defense and security cooperation. So, as we know, Russia is a major supplier of defense items to the Indian armed forces, and both the nations are in joint research and development as well as in the production of advanced defense items. And as per the SIPRI International Arms Transfers 2024 report, Russia continues to be India's largest arms supplier. And also, in 2018, if you see, India has actually signed a $5 billion deal with Russia in order to buy 5 units of S-400 air defense missile systems. Again, very, very important. And both the sides actually conduct the tri-services exercise named as Indra. This is also very, very important. Next one, if you see the trade and economic cooperation, the bilateral trade between both the countries touched 25 billion in 2022. Next one, if you see bilateral investments also have actually reached around $30 billion in 2018. Next, if you see, there have been also multilateral cooperations. That is, Russia actually supports India's bid for a permanent seat in the UNSC and membership of the NST, that is a nuclear supply group. And also, both the sides have an active engagement at the SCO as well as the BRICS, that is international multilateral organizations. These are as well as in the connectivity projects like the INSTC, that is the International North-South Transport Corridor. Here, this is also important as you have to know the extent, the stretch from where to where it is, what are the advantages economically that it will actually give to India, etc. Next one, other areas of cooperation. First one, in terms of nuclear energy, Russia is an important partner for India in the area of peaceful use of nuclear energy. And also, if you see the KKNPP, that is the Kudamkulam nuclear power plant is being built in India, and both India and Russia are implementing the Rupur nuclear power project in Bangladesh. And then if you see, in terms of space cooperation, Russia has supported India's space program since its early days, and the Soviet Union had actually launched India's first unmanned satellite Aryabhat in 1975. And also today, if you see, Russia is supporting India's first manned space mission, that is the Gaganyaan mission. And next one, in terms of science and technology, India and Russia's relationship extends to the field of basic sciences as well, including the Russian-Indian network, that is the RIN of universities, Arctic as well as the Antarctic research, etc. Now let us look into a few of the challenges that these both countries actually face with respect to that of the relationship they share. First one, economic challenges. Issue is that India is actually facing a very high trade deficit. That is, there is a high trade deficit between India and Russia. The factors include Russia's regulatory impediments, the phytosanitary standards that they have actually put in place, and the non-tariff barriers. This actually have worsened the situation. The next one, that is regional tension, because Russia has close ties with that of India's regional adversary like both China as well as Pakistan. This is one of the problems. The causes, that is the impact is it causes discomfort in the India-Russia relationship. And also in terms of defense, India's defense modernization and diversification efforts is also one of the issue. The impact is this reduces dependence on the Russian defense, because when India is actually trying to indigenize, the manufacturing of weapons and other things, it is reducing the dependence on the Russian defense supplies, potentially straining the defense ties between both the sides. Next, there is also a changing world order where, it is like between the major powers like US versus Russia. Few countries are sidelining with the US, since India is also a democratic country. It is actually sidelining with the principles of the United States as against Russia, where the inclination is towards China. So, there is shift towards a bipolar world due to the US-China rivalry. And also, impact is that conflicts with India, Russia's vision of a multipolar world, leading to a divergence in the strategic interest. The next one, expanding geostrategic interest, is that India is actually expanding its interest beyond the Indian Ocean region and South Asia. And finally, with respect to that of natural inclination to that of the West, that is India's democratic setup as well as the affinity towards the West, particularly that of the USA and major European nations, is actually of late increasing. Okay, this poses a challenge to the India-Russia relationship. The next article that we'll be discussing about is the High Seas Treaty. Okay, so in this particular article, we'll be looking at the recent decision that has been made by the Indian government in order to sign as well as ratify this particular High Seas Treaty, which is an international legal architecture or nothing but it is a framework in order to maintain the ecological health of the oceans. Okay, so it is very simple. So here it is important for us to understand what do you mean by this particular high seas or the international waters. For that, we need to know different terms like what do you mean by internal waters, what is meant by the exclusive economic zone, and where do all the countries actually have the rights to exploit the natural resources, etc. are very, very important. So here we'll be discussing about what are high seas, what is the requirement for a high seas treaty, and what are the provisions of this particular treaty and when did it actually come into existence. So in this particular article, we'll be discussing about the UN High Seas Treaty, the marine pollution and conservation, and this entire topic can be mapped to environment under prelims examination, and for the mains examination, it is under GS paper 3, environmental pollution and degradation. Okay. So, moving forward, let us actually see there has been a question which has been asked in the mains examination in 2018 regarding the consequences of spreading of dead zones on the marine ecosystem. So, marine health, marine ecosystem, the exploitation of the resources, whether it's a global common or not, what are all the countries, have what kind of rights over there, are all important for your mains examination. Now, let us understand what this particular topic is discussing about. Okay. So, the Indian government said that it would sign and ratify the UN High Seas Treaty. Let's understand about that. So, before that, let us understand this particular concept of high seas. Okay. So, if you see in this particular picture, you can actually see this part of the ocean is actually referred to as the high seas. Okay. Or it is also called as the international waters. And if you actually look at this particular portion of the land to this particular portion that is still the baseline, it is called as the internal waters. And also from there to the next 12 nautical miles, it is called as the territorial sea. And the next 12 nautical miles is called as the contiguous zone. And from this particular baseline to 200 nautical miles is actually called as this exclusive economic zone. And here it is the international airspace, and till here you have the continental shelf, etc. And this is actually referred to as the deep sea bed. Okay. So now let us actually understand what are high seas. So here we'll see high seas are actually part of the ocean that fall outside a nation's exclusive economic zone. If you see beyond this 200 nautical miles. Okay. That is extending up to, that is EEZ actually extends up to 200 nautical miles or 370 kilometers from the coastline. Okay. Also often referred to as the international waters or the open ocean. These areas are not managed or protected by any single country. And what or how much of area this actually encompasses, if you see, the high seas cover 43% of the entire Earth's surface, 61% of the surface area of the oceans, and 70% of volume of the living space of the Earth. This is actually huge. Now moving forward, let us understand what is the requirement of a high seas treaty. Okay, so here there is a need for high seas treaty because there is lack of regulation of this particular high seas, which is beyond that exclusive economic zone of 200 nautical miles. So lack of regulation. So here high seas are beyond the jurisdiction of any one single country. So there needs actually an umbrella regulatory framework, okay, leading to the exploitation and degradation without adequate legislation. So since there is no one particular standard framework, there is a lot of exploitation as well as degradation that is actually happening. Next is only 1.44 of the high seas are currently demarcated as a protected areas. That too, it is mostly near Antarctica. Next one, what is the need? There are a lot of ecological threats that is actually surrounding, where the threats actually include pollution, over exploitation of resources, as well as biodiversity loss are significant threats in the international waters. Also, by 2050, it is estimated that there will be plastic pollution, that is, there will be more dumping of plastics by weight in oceans than compared to that of fish, which is extremely concerning. The next one, for the protection of biodiversity, we need a regulatory framework, okay, so for which India actually has to sign and ratify this particular treaty. So here, high seas host approximately 2.2 million marine species and up to 1 trillion different types of microorganisms. And to be very specific, nearly 10% of the marine plants and animals which are actually evaluated by the IUCN, that is International Union for Conservation of Nature's Red List, are in the risk of extinction in this particular region. Also, equitable sharing of benefits must be there. That is, high seas are considered the common heritage of all the humanity, that is, the benefits of which should be shared by, by equitable means. And also, currently no mechanism actually ensure the fair distribution of these benefits, and that is why in order to regulate all these parameters, we actually need a high sea treaty. Moving forward, now let us understand what is the high sea treaty, which is already in existence, and when did it actually come into existence. So, the UN High Seas Treaty, also known as the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdictions, that is the BBNJ Agreement, is a legally binding international agreement. This is very important because there was a question whether CITES is legally binding, whether this High Seas Treaty is legally binding, whether India has actually signed and ratified it. All these are very important specifically for your prelims examination. So, it is a legally binding international agreement being formulated under the UNCLOS, that is the United Nations Convention on the Laws of Seas. Over. Now moving on to the purpose, its goal is to establish a comprehensive legal framework for the protection of oceans as well as the marine life and ecosystems, especially in the high seas areas that previously without such protection. Okay, so high seas have not been having such protection in place. Next one, framework. The treaty will actually function as an implementation agreement within the UNCLOS, just like how the Paris Agreement operates under the UNFCCC. This is just for your understanding. How do you have the Paris Clause, the Paris Convention or Agreement under the UNFCCC to combat climate change? Similarly, under UNCLOS, you actually have this particular high seas treaty. The current status of the treaty is it actually has 91 countries that have signed the treaty, with 8 actually having ratified it. Here it is important to know what is the meaning of ratification and signing it. Next one is ratification requirement. The treaty will come into force with at least 60 countries ratify it, and it will become an international law 120 days after the 60th ratification. Now moving on, let us understand few of the parameters of the provisions that this particular high seas treaty actually provide. The first one, it actually, creates the marine protected areas. Here is nothing but the treaty introduces a mechanism for the demarcation of what are all the protected areas. We saw only 1.4% of the high seas actually protected, specifically concentrated near the Antarctic region. So here, the treaty calls for a mechanism of demarcation of these MPAs in order to conserve and protect the marine environment and biodiversity. Also, the MPAs are essential in areas where ocean systems are stressed by huge anthropological activities, that is human activities or climate change, functioning similarly to the national parks, the biosphere reserves, wildlife reserves of the ocean. Next one, currently fewer than 100 of approximately 18,200 MPAs are in the high seas, and the treaty aims to increase this number in order to achieve the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework goal, which actually aims to restore 30% of degraded coastal as well as marine ecosystem by the year 2030. So you need to know what do you mean by convening Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Moving on, the next one is Access and Benefit Sharing Committee. Okay, so this committee will actually develop guidelines for access to and sharing of benefits from the marine genetic resources beyond the national jurisdictions, and also it establishes a clearinghouse mechanism, that is nothing but CHM, that facilitates the exchange of information between member states regarding the access and benefit sharing of marine genetic resources beyond the national jurisdictions. Also, there are environmental impact assessments. Okay, the treaty mandates EIAs for any kind of activity that could potentially damage the marine ecosystem. That actually ensures transparency and accountability before any project is actually taking place in the high seas or in the exploration or exploitation of the resources. Next is, there has to be consent from the indigenous community. That is, the treaty stipulates that access to marine resources in the areas outside the national jurisdiction of a particular country, especially those belonging to the indigenous and the local communities, must be granted with their free, informed consent, approval, as well as the involvement. And finally, this actually shows that this particular treaty acknowledges the critical role of indigenous communities in the sustainable marine resource management. Now moving forward, there is something called a special fund for the developing countries. A special fund which will be managed by the Conference of Parties, that is the COP, will be established to provide financial assistance to all the developing countries to help them participate in implementing the treaty, as well as the COP will also oversee the treaty functioning. And finally, capacity building and technology transfer. This treaty, apart from all the other protections like the EIAs, etc., it promotes capacity building and transfer of marine technologies to developing countries in order to enable sustainable use and conservation of marine resources. Okay. So here, towards the conclusion, see, all these provisions that the High Seas Treaty provides, it's just important to know or have a fair idea about it and not to just cram it up. It is not that very important. It is just for your understanding. We've actually, dealt with in detail. Now the conclusion, this particular High Seas Treaty presents a significant step towards the global marine conservation, sustainable usage of resources as well as equitable sharing of benefits that actually come from the resources of the ocean. Its implementation will address the regulatory void in international waters we saw, where why is the need for a treaty? We actually saw there's lack of regulation, etc., helping to protect the marine biodiversity, promote the sustainable development, and also aid in achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goal 14. So here the takeaway is also to know all the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The next article that we'll be discussing about is Financial Inclusion Index rose with growth across the segments. Okay, so in this particular topic, what can be the takeaway for the prelims examination is to understand what is this particular financial inclusion and also understand about this particular index, that is Financial Inclusion Index, who releases it and what are the parameters which is actually used for calculating it and how is it actually calculated, whether 0 to 100, 0 indicates what and 100 actually indicates what level of inclusivity. All these are very, very important for our understanding. Okay. So, in this particular article, we'll be discussing about what is this particular financial inclusion as well as a financial inclusion index that has been released by the RBI. Here, this particular topic can be mapped to GS Paper 3 for the mains examination under inclusive growth and issues arising from it. Now, if you see the previous year question, there was a question asked on one of the relevant schemes in 2008 in the prelims examination. For example, it is Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. So, these kind of schemes and indices, what are the parameters, what are the provisions of the scheme, who are the beneficiaries who will be covered, what percentage of success it has actually achieved, the year of implementation, the parent organization, all these are very, very important, particularly for your prelims examination. Now, moving forward, let us discuss about what this particular article is discussing about. So, the Reserve Bank of India has published the Financial Inclusion Index for the year ending March 31st, 2024. So, before moving into what are the key findings of the recent index, it is important for us to understand what is this particular term financial inclusion mean. So, financial inclusion means providing affordable financial services to everyone, including the disadvantaged as well as the LIGs, that is the low income group people. And it covers all type of services like savings, payments as well as credit, that is the loans that is offered by the formal financial institution. So this is very, very important. Now moving forward, let us understand what is this particular financial inclusion index. Okay, so it is a comprehensive index that includes the details ranging from banking, what is the kind of investment, the insurance, the postal as well as the pension sectors. Okay, and the RBI has actually developed this particular index in 2021 without a designated base year. Okay, so here it is important to know that it is the RBI, to also note that the base year is actually not fixed and it is published annually in the month of July. And this particular index aims to capture the extent of financial inclusion throughout the country, evaluating the ease of access, the availability, the usage as well as the quality of services through a range of indicators. To be very specific, it is 97 indicators. Okay. Now moving forward, let us see what are all the parameters of this particular index. So, this Financial Inclusion Index captures various aspects of financial inclusion in a single value that will actually range between 0 and 100. This particular 0 signifies complete financial exclusivity. That is, people with this particular, value of 0, they are completely excluded. And here, 100 actually signifies full financial inclusion. And also, it comprises 3 broad parameters with respective weights. Let's see what are the parameters. These are AUQ, that is nothing but access, usage as well as quality. And the weightage is 35%, 40% as well as 20% respectively. And now let us understand what is the respective description. Okay. So, the parameter access, here the weightage is 35%. This actually measures the availability of financial services through bank branches, then availability of ATMs as well as post offices, insurance company branches, etc. in a locality. Next one is usage, that is 45%. Here, it actually assesses the extent of use of the financial services like credit, the deposits, the digital transfers, as well as insurance policy, mutual fund accounts, the microfinances that is actually taking place in an economy, as well as the remittances that we actually receive from abroad. The next one is quality, which is actually weighed as 20%. This evaluates the effectiveness of the financial services in terms of what is the kind of financial literacy the particular population has, the satisfaction the consumer actually have, the grievance redressal, what are the dormant accounts and why are they still dormant, as well as the availability of diverse financial products to the people. So, further if you see, each parameter, that is, the access, the usage as well as the quality, is further broken down into various other dimensions. As we saw, there were totally 97 indicators, right? And these are actually computed based on several indicators. Now let us see what are the key findings of the recent index that has been released by the RBI. So, the index value for March 2024 is 64.2 compared to that of 60.1, which was in March 2023. And all the sub-indices showed growth, and the improvement in this particular index is primarily driven by the usage dimensions, indicating a deepening of financial inclusion. So, this is what is the takeaway from this particular article of financial inclusion. The next article that we'll be discussing about is defamation case against Wikipedia and safe harbor protection clause. Okay. So, as you actually remember, a week back we've already discussed about this particular provision of safe harbor protection clause that is actually mentioned under section 79 of the IT Act of 2000, and how it actually provides or gives immunity to the internet intermediaries against the content that is actually posted on their platform. Okay. So, when we're discussing about, the governance surrounding the generative AI as well, we've actually discussed about this particular clause. So, over here, we'll be discussing about the provisions of the IT Act of 2000 and this particular safe harbor clause. And also, this particular topic can be mapped to GS paper 2 for the mains examination under important aspects of governance, transparency and accountability. Moving forward, there has been a question that has been asked in the mains examination in 2015, discussed the section 66A of the IT Act with reference to its alleged violation of Article 19 of the Constitution. So, this particular topic becomes very, very important for both your prelims as well as the mains examination. Now, let us understand what this particular article is discussing about. Okay. So, the ANI news agency, that is the Asian News International, has filed a defamation case against Wikipedia in the Delhi High Court and is actually seeking the damages or the compensation, which actually amounts to around 2 crores. Okay. So here ANI claims that the content on its Wikipedia page is very defamatory, it is actually false and is actually damaging the reputation. The court has sought a response from Wikipedia and will actually hear the case on 20th of August, that is next month. Okay. So now let us actually understand about the complaint that has been made against Wikipedia by this particular news agency. Okay. So the petition of the ANI states that the edits made in April to reflect the accurate position of ANI were reversed in May, allegedly in order to harm the reputation of this particular news agency. And also ANI contends that the false content on Wikipedia had cast doubts on the credibility of this particular news agency. Okay. So the laws invoked in this case actually include, it's very important to understand these laws. So ANI has invoked several provisions of the Information Technology Act. First one is Section 2, Clause 1, Clause W. This defines a significant social media intermediary as an entity. That is basically, it gives a definition to an internet intermediary. Internet intermediary is nothing but these are your social media accounts, like whether it is the Facebook or whether it is Instagram, or you can also say Twitter, and how it is actually protected under this particular clause. Okay. So here Section 2, Clause 1, Clause W, this defines a significant social media intermediary as an entity that receives, that stores or transmits the records or provides services with respect to records on behalf of another person. And it includes the telecom service providers, the network service providers, internet service providers, web hosting service providers, search engines, online payment sites, online auction sites, etc. Okay. And also Section 79 Clause 2 and 3, they actually outline the conditions for the safe harbor clause, which provides immunity to the intermediaries from liability for third-party content if certain conditions are actually met. Next, moving on, Section 79 Clause 2 in particular, here it actually says that the internet intermediaries are not liable if they do not initiate the content transmission, if they do not select the receiver and they do not alter the content. Okay. And also 79 Clause 3 actually says that immunities does not apply in case if the intermediary has conspired, has abetted, aided or induced the unlawful act, okay, or any kind of activity. Next one, the immunity won't be provided is if the intermediary, despite being informed by the government, fails to remove or disable access to the unlawful content. Now moving on, let us understand this particular safe harbor clause. So Section 79 of this IT Act offers protection to the intermediaries like Wikipedia, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. from being held liable for third-party content if they do not initiate the transmission or select the receiver or alter the content that we already saw. And this protection applies if the intermediaries adhere to the Intermediary Guidelines and Digital Media Ethics Code 2021, and the guidelines actually require intermediaries in order to set up a grievance redressal mechanism and appoint the key officers to address the same. Now looking at few of the SC rulings in such cases, that is which are kept as precedents and referred to. First one, in October 10, 2022, the Supreme Court dismissed a petition by the Ayurvedic Medicine Manufacturers Organization of India against Wikipedia, suggesting the petitioners edit the article themselves or seek other legal remedies. Next one, January 17, 2023, the court actually, in the case of Hewlett-Packard India Sales versus Commissioner of Customs, the Supreme Court noted that Wikipedia and other online sources were extensively referred to by adjudicating authorities. So it is essential to actually maintain the content as legit as possible. The next article that we'll be discussing today will be US economy no longer overheated, Fed's Powell. So this statement has actually come from the US Fed chairman, Mr. Powell, who actually stated that the US economy is no longer overheated. Okay. So here the takeaway for us from this particular article is to understand certain concepts of what do you mean by an overheated economy, and what is this Federal Reserve, and what is the implication of the rate hikes as well as the rate cuts by this particular organization, that is the Federal Reserve, And what do you mean by inflation, and how does these rate hikes as well as cuts, how do they actually influence this particular process of inflation in an economy? What are the implications of it on Indian economy, as well as this particular concept of unemployment? All these become very, very important for both your prelims as well as the mains examination. Now, this particular topic can be mapped to the prelims under economic and social development, and for the mains examination under GS paper 3, Indian economy and issues relating to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, development as well as employment. Now, moving forward, there has been a previous year question asked at the prelims examination in the year 2013 with respect to that of an increase in the bank rate. So, here increase or decrease in the bank rates and what the implications it actually has on other monetary policy, etc. is very, very important for your examination. Now, let us understand what this particular article is discussing about. So, here the Fed chair, Mr. Jerome Powell, stated that the US is no longer an overheated economy, noting that the job market has cooled considerably from its pandemic era highs and has largely returned to its pre-crisis state. Okay, so that is what he has stated, that the US economy is no longer overheated. And if you see the job market, it has actually cooled considerably, with unemployment as well, which is also under check, and also this economy has actually moved back or returned to its pre-crisis state. So, we'll understand about what do you mean by the overheating of the economy. And before that, it is important for us to discuss about this particular US Fed Reserve. Okay. So, his remarks actually indicated the justification for potential interest rate cuts is growing stronger. So, here it is also important to understand this particular concept of US rate cuts and how it actually essentially works. So, now let us actually understand what is this particular US Federal Reserve. Okay, so this US Federal Reserve is nothing but it is the Federal Reserve System. It is the central bank and the monetary authority of the United States. Just as how the central bank and the monetary authority of India happens to be the Reserve Bank of India, similarly, this US Fed actually functions in the United States. And often called as the Fed, it is arguably the most influential financial institution in the world, because any kind of rate hikes as well as cuts by this particular US Fed actually has implications and consequences on the rest of the global economies. Okay, so the Fed's main duties include conducting national monetary policy, supervising and regulating the banks, as also maintaining the financial stability of the United States. Now, let us understand how does it actually function. So, the federal funds rate is nothing but the target interest rate which is set by the Fed, at which the commercial banks borrow and lend their extra reserves to one another overnight. It is simple, just like how RBI gives loans to the other commercial banks at a particular interest rate. That is what it is, and that is referred to as the federal funds rate. Okay, so it is a key tool in the US monetary policy in order to control the inflation in an economy. Even in case of India, it is actually the function of the RBI in order to increase or decrease the cuts in order to maintain this phenomenon of inflation in the economy. And similar is the function of this particular US Fed. How does it actually function? That is, if there is a lower rates or the rate cut, this is nothing but lowering the federal fund rate makes borrowing cheaper. That is, your loans are actually cheaply available so that you can borrow more, you can invest more. Okay, so which can encourage the spending and investment, but may also lead to higher inflation, because when there is too much of wealth or liquidity in the economy, it results in higher inflation. Also, in order to curb inflation, what can a bank do is that it can actually hike, or there is a higher rate of interest. Here, raising the federal funds rate increases the borrowing cost, which can slow down the spending and investment in order to curb this phenomenon of inflation. Now, let us see what do you mean by overheating of the economy. Okay, so an overheated economy is the one that has experienced a prolonged period of good economic growth and the activity that has led to high levels of inflation triggered by increased consumer wealth. Okay, so if you don't understand this technical statement, let me say, for example, I am the consumer. If my income levels are actually high, so that the wealth and the liquidity with me is very high, this ultimately increases my demands, and that actually increases production in the economy. And this is what is actually the meaning of an overheated economy. Okay, so when the demand is more, ultimately the margin, that is a profit margin that the producers keep for his product, will be more. So ultimately there is inflation. Okay, so it is one that has actually experienced a prolonged period of good economic growth and activity, and this has actually led to high levels of inflation, which is triggered by increased consumer wealth, that I actually explained in simple terms. And it occurs when the rapid economic expansion leads to unsustainable conditions, and this often results in sharp rise in the prices, which is known as inflation. And now let us understand, when the prices actually rise quickly, it can cause inefficiencies in the economy. Either there is actually too much of inflation, and followed by that there might be recession as well. So here, producers may respond by overproducing the goods. Okay, so when there is actually hike in the prices, there is overproduction of goods by the producers, and this actually creates excess production capacity in an economy, and so there are actually associated inefficiencies in the economy. However, these inefficiencies and the resulting inflation can eventually slow down the economic growth and will eventually lead to recession. Okay, so now let us understand what are the causes of overheated economy with examples, so that it will be easier for you to understand. So an overheated economy can be driven by several factors, including rising inflation, low unemployment rates. There can be asset bubbles that is actually caused, as well as external economic shocks like you have the oil shocks and all those things, and volatility associated. So first one is the rising rates of inflation. First is, inflation increases when the demand for goods and services exceeds the supply. This you actually know, and this actually drives the prices high. And when this has actually happened between June 2004 and 2006, the Federal Reserve Board increased the interest rates. That is what I told you, right? When there's too much of inflation or liquidity in the economy, there is an increase in the interest rate. So that what happens, borrowing actually becomes a very costly affair. So this actually curbs the inflation in the economy. So this was increased around 17 times to slow down America's overheated economy. Okay. So moving forward, the next one, abnormally high employment rates. The next factor, that is when the unemployment rate, see, there is a normal level of unemployment that actually has to exist in an economy. But when the unemployment rate is actually low when compared to that of the normal level, what happens? It indicates that the economy is operating beyond its sustainable capacity, leading to higher inflation. Because what happens, there will be only few people who are actually under this employment bracket, and the employers will actually invest a lot of money in them. And so here there will be full employability and there will be lesser unemployability. Okay, so this again leads to higher inflation, because the wealth which is accumulated in few people who are actually employed in this employment bracket will be high. Next one, if you see the example of it, before the Great Recession of 2008, the unemployment rate fell continuously until 2007, which reached almost 4.6%, which is below the normal unemployment rate. And this full employment contributed to higher inflation and eventually led to an economic downturn. Next is the asset bubbles. What is this is? Rapid and unsustainable increases in the asset prices can create bubbles that can, when reaching, a point of saturation, they actually burst and they cause significant economic disruption. So, example is the dot-com bubble burst in 2001, resulting in the recession. Okay, so what do you mean by this particular dot-com bubble was that it is also referred to as the internet bubble. Okay, this is nothing but it is a period between 1995 and 2000 where the investors actually pumped in a lot of money into the internet-based startups in the hopes that these particular, organizations and enterprises will actually turn out to be profitable. But that also resulted in recession. Next one, there are external economic shocks that I actually told. There are unexpected events or changes in the global economy that can actually disrupt the economic stability and contribute to overheating. For example, the oil shocks in 1970s and 80s that caused recession of varying lengths and severity in the United States as the country's oil import bill actually soared to meet the increased demand for gasoline. Now let us solve few prelims as well as a mains practice question. The first question reads, under which act are the intermediaries granted immunity from the liability for third-party content If they do not initiate the transmission, select the receiver or alter the content. Here, the right answer is Information Technology Act as Indian Telegraph Act of 1885 is wrong. Digital Security Act is also wrong, and the Cyber Crimes Act is also wrong. So here the answer is option A. Moving forward, the second question reads, the Reserve Bank of India has published the Financial Inclusion Index for the year 2024, and which of the following statements is or are correct about this particular index? The index captures various aspects of financial inclusion with a single value ranging from 0 to 100, where 0 represents complete financial exclusion and 100 indicates full financial inclusion. Yes, this is actually correct. The three broad parameters are access, usage and quality with 35%, 45% and 20%. This is also correct. It is published by the RBI twice a year. This is actually wrong because it's annual. And the improvement in this index for the March 2024 is primarily driven by access dimension. No, it is actually usage. Only since statement 1 and 2 are correct here, the answer will be option A. Now moving forward, the third question reads, consider the following statements. High seas are parts of the ocean that fall outside the contiguous zone. No, this is actually wrong. It's outside the exclusive economic zone. The high seas cover 61% of the Earth's surface and 43% of the surface area of the ocean. No, this is actually wrong. So which of the statements given above is or are correct? Since both are wrong, the answer will be option D, neither 1 nor 2. Moving on, the fourth question reads, Order of St. Andrew the Apostle, sometimes mentioned in the news as the highest civilian award of which of the following country? It is France. No, this is wrong. Saudi Arabia. No, it is wrong. Russia. This is actually correct, as we discussed that it was given to the Indian Prime Minister. And Germany, this is also wrong. So here the answer will be option C. Now moving forward, the fifth question actually reads, an overheated economy, sometimes seen in the news, refers to which of the following? A period of economic stagnation due to low consumer demand? No, this is wrong. A prolonged period of economic growth and high inflation? Yes, this is actually correct. A phase of balanced economic expansion and moderate inflation? This is actually wrong. And a recessionary period marked by deflation? This is also wrong. Since option B is actually correct, the correct answer will be option B. Now moving on to the mains practice question. The question reads, do you agree that the high seas or the international waters beyond the national jurisdictions are often overlooked in the scope of legal framework addressing marine pollution and degradation? Support your arguments with reasons. Now, the approach answer for this particular question is divided, or it is broken down into three. That is the introduction, the body, as well as the conclusion. So, in the introduction, we will briefly define about what are high seas and highlight the lack of stringent legal frameworks for managing the marine pollution and degradation. And in the body, we'll discuss about what have been the evidence of neglect and the reasons for the legal gaps which are actually persistent there, and the implications of the neglect, where we will illustrate the environmental impacts such as the loss of biodiversity as well as unchecked exploitation. And finally, towards the conclusion, we will actually stress on the necessity of international cooperation and effective treaties like the UN High Seas Treaty in order to ensure the sustainable management and the conservation of the high seas. With this, we've actually come to the conclusion of our daily news analysis for today. So please do like, share and subscribe to Narayana IAS Academy YouTube channel for further videos and more such updates. Thank you and have a good day.